Good heavens! Maya froze in the middle of the red dirt path as the reflection in the water behind her suddenly flared like a golden lamp being stirred. The baby in her arms shifted slightly, its skin catching the light in fine, shimmering streaks like golden scales. But what was swimming beneath the surface wasn't the warm golden glow of Liana, the radiant golden-scaled mermaid Queen Maya had met on that fateful night. This gold was sharp, cold, long like a serpent's body, following Maya with a terrifying patience, as if it knew exactly what she carried in her arms. The river wind whipped across her back, carrying the deep sound of something thrashing in the water. Maya knew something didn't want this child to live until dawn. But why had it followed her all the way to the edge of the village? And what would happen if it wasn't just watching, but coming to take it back? The night sky sank lower, thick, black, and damp, pressing against Maya's back as she stepped away from the riverbank. The narrow red dirt path was flanked by wild grass tall as her knees. Every brush against her legs rustled like the whispers of old women rocking on their porches. The baby in her arms weighed almost nothing, yet each tiny breath it took made her own chest ache heavier. Beneath the moonlight, its skin no longer looked merely honey-toned. Faint halos shimmered across it, as though someone had dusted gold powder over the surface. Whenever she shifted the cloth wrapped around its body, a golden flash flared and died, like a coal trying to hide. Behind her, the Louisiana River lay stretched out, like a giant python coiled in sleep. At a glance, the water looked calm, only the trembling streak of the moon floating on it. But Maya's ears caught sounds that didn't belong to an ordinary current. Instead of the gentle lapping at the bank, she heard heavy, deep thrashings, as if some enormous body were gliding beneath the river's black skin. Every now and then, a cold golden glint winked and vanished, stinging her eyes the way red-hot metal does. She didn't need a closer look to know it wasn't Liana's gold. The mermaid queen rose in her mind, hair drifting like ribbons of light, soft upper body, a tail covered in radiant yet gentle golden scales, each one a small coin of sunlight. Liana's gold was round and warm, exactly like late afternoon light spilling over quiet water. The gold trailing her now was different, sharp, broken, jagged, the kind of light that bounces off knives and shattered glass. It didn't caress the water, it cut it. Maya's heart hammered. She forced herself not to turn around. Human eyes would never catch whatever hid there anyway. She focused on her steps, feeling the soft mud under her heels, the smell of river moss, the faint drift of cooking smoke from the village far ahead. Every breath she drew tasted of earth. Every breath the baby exhaled carried the faintest salt of deep water. The two scents twisted together in the air, reminding her she stood on the border between two worlds. At a low stretch of the path, fog from the swamp rolled in, covering her knees. The moon vanished behind it, leaving only stray streaks on the cypress leaves. Maya slowed, clutching the child tighter. In the gray-white mist, she suddenly felt the ground beneath her feet grow uncertain, as though the entire path were nothing more than a thin raft floating on water's back. From behind came a wind smelling of cold fish. She thought she heard a thin, long hiss, taut as metal scraping stone. She stopped and whipped her head toward the river. The surface lay still, but the moon suddenly shattered into several golden fragments drifting apart. Between those fragments, something long and slender flickered, curved, and was gone. Gooseflesh raced across Maya's back. She knew eyes down there were staring straight through the tall grass, through walls, through the cloth she'd wrapped the baby in, and resting on the tiny face pressed against her chest. The baby stirred. Its leaf-small hands touched her neck. That tiny warmth snapped her back into her own body. She drew a deep breath and walked faster, mud-heavy shoes and all. With every step, she listened to the child, checking if its breathing stayed steady, trying to guess how much of that little chest still belonged to water, and how much was beginning to belong to land. Little by little, the thatched roofs of the village appeared. Faint golden lights flickering like fireflies settled on the ground. Smells of burning firewood, sizzling onions, clothes taken in after days on the line. All of it greeted her with the familiar warmth of childhood. But tonight, looking at those oil lamps, she realized. A few more steps, and she would drag the entire river world right into these homes. None of them knew they were sleeping on a mat, spread across the back of a gigantic creature that could roll over and crack everything apart. Godwin's house sat on the village edge, closest to the river. The smoke from his cook fire was usually the first thing she saw when returning from fetching water. Tonight, the smoke had died. Only a thin blade of lamplight spilled from the small window onto the dirt. In that light, she saw dust floating, tiny specks hanging like words not yet spoken between two people. She stepped inside, her shoulder brushing the rough wooden door frame with its familiar creak. Inside, Godwin sat motionless at the table, back to her. The long knife lay beside him. The whetstone was still wet, flashing white streaks whenever the lamp flickered. Maya stood there a long time until the baby whimpered, its toes curling inside the cloth, face scrunching as if about to cry. She drew it closer, hoping the warmth from her chest could calm them both. In the stretching silence, her head filled with stories she could tell. She could speak of the moonlit night on the riverbank, of the queen with dazzling golden scales rising through the waves, eyes holding the treasure of light from the river's depths. She could say this child was the answer to a desperate plea, that if she hadn't carried it away, a curse would drown the underwater world. She could confess that when she looked into its eyes, she'd seen something of herself reflected there, and she hadn't been able to turn away. But every one of those sentences landed and flew off again, like birds perching on a wire before taking flight. She knew that to the man seated in front of her, the only truth was raw and plain. His daughter had brought home a baby in the middle of the night. Everything else, mermaids, golden scales, promises made to the river, was just mist that would vanish the moment it touched the ground. Godwin didn't turn, yet Maya felt his whole back grow rigid. That back had once been a wall between her and the world when she was small, shielding her from rain, wind, and the prying eyes of neighbors after her mother died too young. Now the wall rose again, only this time it stood between her and him. Outside, river wind slipped through the cracks, carrying damp cold into the wordless space between them. After a long while, he stood, walked toward the door, and looked out into the darkness. Not one question, not one word of blame, but his shoulders sagged ever so slightly, as if an invisible stone had just been added. He stepped onto the porch, leaving Maya alone in the silent room, with only the baby's steady breathing. She laid the child on an old blanket, cloth softened by years. The baby smacked its lips, turned its head, lashes trembling beneath the lamplight. For the blink of an eye, Maya caught a tiny golden spark at the corner of its eye, then gone. She touched its hair strands fine as silk, smelling faintly of skin and distant salt. Outside, water gently slapped the bank. The rhythm like a lullaby, someone was singing far away, low and deep. Night thickened around the house. The river's scent crept through the cracks, mingling with wood and cold ashes. Maya sat with her back against the wall, eyes never leaving the small form on the blanket. She understood that from this moment on, not only would the people of the land watch her with questions in their eyes, but eyes beneath the water were watching too, waiting to see what she would do with the gift or burden they had placed in her arms. And somewhere under the black waves, between two opposing golds, a question waited for its answer. How strong would the mother standing on the shore prove to be when the storm rose from the river's heart? And now, dear viewers, please pause for just a second to hit that subscribe button before we continue with the main part of the story, but only if you truly feel for what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Morning came slowly, dragging heavy dampness behind it, as if the night refused to peel itself off the ground. The first sunlight slipped through Godwin's window and fell across the blanket where the baby slept. Its skin caught a faint glow, not the bold gold of last night under the river, but a thin, powdery sheen. Its eyes stayed peacefully shut, yet every tiny breath reminded Maya that last night had been no dream. In the yard, early season birds called out, mixing with the thud of a neighbor's rice pestle. Village mornings always moved to a slow, earthy rhythm. But today, Maya no longer felt that calm. Every familiar sound seemed muffled behind a thin veil that pressed down on everything. She quietly lifted the baby and stepped outside. River wind rushed in at once, carrying the muddy breath of deep water, laced with faint cypress pollen from the far bank. A salty trace grazed her lips and brought back memories of last night's golden streaks beneath the surface. Not quite the smell of the sea, but of something coiled tight, waiting for the right moment to spring. The village still drowsed. Only a few women were kindling early fires. Flames flickered over the patchy ground. They glanced at Maya, holding the child, and their eyes no longer held the easy warmth of past mornings. Instead, there was hesitation, a curiosity too awkward to name, and a silent space where gossip had not yet found words. Maya lowered her head and walked faster, not from shame, but because she didn't want anyone staring too long at the small face pressed against her chest, especially when early light could easily reveal those faint golden patches on its skin. She knew that if just one person whispered they'd seen something strange, the whole village would turn away faster than floodwater rising after heavy rain. She headed toward the riverbank, where the water always caught the sun brightest. The shallows there weren't deep, but a strong current swept the bottom, as if an invisible hand kept pushing. Maya knelt, settled the baby on her lap, and let the morning water mirror its face. Cool mist touched the child's forehead. Its eyelids fluttered once, long and slow. At that exact instant, the river rippled, not from wind, not from fish. It was the same motion she'd felt last night, the glide of something huge, long, hidden, swimming close to the bottom. The light on the surface turned a darker gold, no clear shape, only stretched streaks that broke and faded, as though someone had crushed a piece of sky and scattered it into the river. Maya rose, stepped back half a pace, and pressed the baby to her chest. The water kept rippling in steady beats, unhurried, not violent, yet anything but natural. Whatever swam beneath knew she was watching. Each ripple felt like a wordless warning, marking territory around the spot where she stood. The sun climbed higher. The gold beneath the water thinned and scattered. Only when it vanished completely did Maya breathe again. She turned to head home, but her foot froze when her eye caught one small detail. A fresh smear of mud dragged sideways along the bank's edge. Something heavy had pressed down, then slid away. The mark was still wet, minutes old, at most. No villager, no farm animal left a trail like that. She understood. Whatever was in the water hadn't only followed last night. It had come close to shore. It was testing how much land it needed to separate her from the river. And if land wasn't enough, it would choose another way. Maya wrapped her arms across the baby's back, shielding it as though someone might snatch it from her at any second. Passing the patch of reeds near the bank, wind made the leaves brush together with a soft sound like silk skirts moving. She heard water lapping at roots, not the steady slap of current, but short, low breaths, as if someone were breathing just under the surface. The sounds wove together until the bright morning carried the smell of night. She looked around and felt clearly that she was no longer the girl who used to fetch water. The ground beneath her feet had grown thinner. The world above looked bright, but one twist from the water and everything would be swallowed into bottomless dark. As she neared the house, the village's familiar noises grew louder. Brooms sweeping yards, mothers calling children, dogs barking at the far end of the clearing. Human life was starting its day. Yet Maya felt the mismatch plainly. Every sound lay under a thick layer of water, dulled by one heartbeat. She stepped onto the porch and had just set the baby on the soft mat, when a tiny sound rose from the river behind her, like fingernails scraping the bottom of a boat. No one else heard it, but it chilled the back of her neck. She knew that sound. The baby knew it too, because its eyes opened, looked toward the door, shining as if reflecting the gold that had just sunk out of sight. And Maya suddenly understood. It wasn't only chasing her, it was calling the child. And the child could hear that call. River wind blew through the window, cold mist raising the hairs on Maya's arms. Somewhere very close, in the deepest part nearby, a cold gold waited for the moment. Land grew soft and water strong enough to pull everything under. She looked at the baby. Its tiny fists clutched her shirt, skin still glowing faintly like dusted gold. Even held on land, part of its soul still leaned toward water. Maya knew that if she meant to keep it, she would have to be stronger than both water and earth, stronger than whatever growled from the riverbed. The sky brightened, but the darkness inside her thickened. The river would not give up, that cold gold would not leave. And Maya, though standing in the middle of a village of people, knew perfectly well her fight had only just begun. Afternoon arrived sooner than usual, as if the sun wanted to flee the cold seeping up from the river's heart. Slanted light sliced thin across Maya's yard, cutting through the dirt and catching dust motes that floated like flecks of gold in the air. All day she had kept the child strapped to her hip, never letting it more than a few steps away. No one in the village asked a thing, but their eyes followed her like distant touches, curious, wary, trying to guess who or what this baby belonged to, something beyond their knowing. Afternoon was when the riverbank changed its mood. No longer calm as morning, the water began moving to its own rhythm, as though invisible footsteps walked the bottom. Maya never went down to the sand at this hour, but today the water tugged gently at her collar, gray, low, not quite calling, not quite threatening. It only wanted to be sure she was listening. She carried Amira out to the porch. The last sunlight struck the baby's eyes. Pale golden sparks flashed and vanished. The child reached for a shaft of light, tiny hand opening like a small flower, then closing as if keeping a secret. For a breath, Maya thought the baby saw something out on the water, a shape adults could only feel, never understand. River wind rose, driving cold straight into her spine. Maya stood still, listening to the afternoon sink like a slowing heartbeat. In that moment, the whole village grew so quiet, she could hear the earth inhale. Then, from the bank, a thin sound like shards of mirror touching rang out. The wind carried it across her skin and raised goose flesh. It was neither water nor wind. It was the stir of something waiting for dusk to rise. She knew that cold gold loved this hour best, when the line between water and sky blurred, the boundary between the human world and the world beneath the river thinned. This was the moment things slipped most easily. The water slapped harder. Not in the shallows from deeper water, black as ink. Small waves rose, broke the scum of algae, and spun into perfect circles. Maya stepped back onto the porch, pressing the child to her chest without thinking. She heard no thrashing like the night before, but the weight of the water was thick, pushing up like the breath of something enormous. In that waiting minute, space warped. The last sunlight stretched into a red blade, fell onto the river, and was swallowed. The surface suddenly stilled, as though every motion had been locked inside. Everything grew so quiet she could hear Amira's heart racing in its tiny chest. Suddenly, from mid-river, a burst of gold flared and died like a blink. Not enough to show shape, only enough to know something huge was moving slowly, deliberately. Streaks of gold spilled from each motion, spreading beneath the surface like pulled threads of glitter. There was no roar, only presence cold, heavy, and stubborn as night, trying to creep into the yard. It swam just under the skin of the water, perfectly in step with the current, as though the river were an extension of its body. Maya felt a shudder rise from the ground through her soles, up her legs, and stop at the nape of her neck. She stood silent, unwilling to draw attention. But the baby in her arms stirred, its eyes fluttered open. Those young pupils turned toward the water, reflecting pale gold like mist. The child did not cry. It only looked, and that frightened Maya more than any scream. As if an invisible cord stretched from the baby's heart down into the river, placing it in the pull of something larger than the human world. The surface suddenly shifted right, then left not from wind, but swept by that massive body. The reeds on the bank shook once, hard. Maya held her breath. She felt eyes, whether creature or spirit, looking up from below. Very slowly, a golden streak rose close to the surface, tracing a long curve like the spine of a great fish. It never broke through enough to show form, but Maya saw the hard, blade-sharp plates of light, utterly unlike Liana's soft candle gold. The streak glided closer, so close she thought she heard scales scrape the water with a metallic hum. In that instant, the air thickened. The riverbank, the bushes, the whole world waited. Maya felt the river's pulse begin to match the creature's, each swell and fall like the chest of a beast readying its leap. Amira stirred again. Maya clutched her tight. Her own heart shook once, but her feet held firm. Fear wrapped around her like dark cloth, yet beneath it something tougher ran through her resolve, hard as roots gripping soil. The streak beneath the water stopped. It came no closer, but Maya felt it measuring, weighing, judging the distance between itself and the child. Like a hunter waiting for the first arrow of the day to fall before striking. Then, without warning, the water blazed as though a second moon had risen from the bottom. Warm, round, silky gold bloomed open, like spreading silk. She didn't need to see the shape, Maya knew at once it was Liana's light. No sound, yet the water trembled in a way the land could feel. The two golds, one cold, one warm, met in silence beneath the surface. A gentle wave touched the bank like a hand's caress. But in that gentleness, Maya felt the muffled roar of two forces holding each other at the edge. In a few heartbeats, the cold light sank deeper. The warm light circled once near Maya's house, then slipped away, leaving the river smooth as if freshly combed. The wind returned, no longer heavy. Space loosened, as though the whole river exhaled. Maya carried Amira inside, but the moment she crossed the threshold she understood. This was only a pause. The gold at the river's heart had not given up. It was simply waiting for deeper night, or one small human mistake. And between those two golds, one guarding, one stalking, she stood on the thin line between land and water, holding a child who belonged to both worlds with everything she had. The sun climbed high, yet that morning's light felt thin, as if the river had sipped half its strength. Rays touched the grass tips and died quickly, leaving the air hazy and gray, like the whole village breathed inside thin fog. Maya woke to the first footsteps outside the yard, the steady sweep of someone's broom marking time. Amira slept in her arms, tiny breaths brushing her mother's neck like wind skimming water. The long night still clung to Maya like fine dust she couldn't shake off. The moment the two golds clashed beneath the river, kept replaying in pieces, the weight of water rising as if to tear the bank away, the cold like fingernails trailing down her spine, and Liana's warm light twisting with the other like two ribbons refusing to let the boundary break. All morning Maya worked in silence. She lit the fire, washed pots, aired the blanket where the baby had slept. Those ordinary tasks used to be the threads tying her to this world, proof she belonged to a life of soil, roof, and people. Today, every chore bent to the river's rhythm. Her hands scrubbed dishes, but her ears listened for water. She folded the blanket, yet her eyes kept flicking to the window. The village woke to its usual pulse, but beneath that pulse, Maya felt the shift. Children's laughter near the reeds sounded thinner. Grown-ups passed with quick glances, signals of something still nameless. Most stayed back from the river's edge this morning not because they knew what had happened, but because people who live beside water always sense when to step away. Even the chickens in Maya's yard refused to wander toward the bank. They huddled near the porch, heads low, as though hearing something humans hadn't caught yet. Near noon, Maya carried Amira outside. The light had sharpened, yet the breeze still carried a faint metallic taste, stored deep in the water for days before rising. She walked slowly along the porch edge, keeping a safe distance from the reeds. The ground felt softer than yesterday, as if something heavy had pressed down and then withdrawn. Each footfall sank deeper than it should. The only sound was water lapping gently at old tree roots along the bank. But the lapping wasn't steady. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, like breathing. Maya stopped, held her own breath, and listened. A small wave rose and fell, not high enough to wet the soil, but rhythmic, the rhythm of a living body. The river wasn't only flowing, it was listening. Maya pulled Amira closer. The child's warmth spread across her chest like a small coal still glowing in ash. She felt the baby's heartbeat, faster than any child she'd ever held. That beat matched the water's, tightening the thread between the two worlds. She turned back inside, refusing to stand in the river's light too long. But the moment her foot crossed the threshold, a flicker at the corner of her eye made her flinch. In the shallows where sunlight lay like thin glass, a long shadow moved along the bottom, an ink stroke dragged by an unseen brush. No blinding gold, just the outline of a slender, sinuous body gliding in perfect silence. It never surfaced, never flashed, only slid past as if testing whether Maya noticed its presence. That silent shadow frightened her more than the cold gold ever had. Gold revealed desire. Silent black revealed nothing. Maya stepped fully inside. Her heart pounded so hard, the air around her seemed to tremble. All afternoon she lived with her ears turned toward the river, while her hands kept doing chores. Every rustle of drying clothes made her tense. Every time the baby shifted, she looked down to be sure no golden mist lingered on its skin. She knew the smallest change could wake whatever waited below a creature she had no name for, no face for, only proof of its terrible patience. Late afternoon, the sky darkened long before sunset. Clouds stacked thick, like the lid of a giant pot holding steam beneath. Wind rose from two directions, swirling together near the bank. Leaves spun in circles, dust lifted in pale sheets. Maya stood on the porch, feeling the ground beneath her, readying a deeper breath. From the river's heart, a string of tiny bubbles rose and drifted. No light, no huge shadow, just bubbles. Yet they refused to break. They held their perfect rounds longer than nature allowed, then slowly split into dots that lined up like beads on a string. Maya knew this was no accident of current. It was a sign or a call. She took another step back, holding Amira against her hip, eyes locked on the water. Space tightened. No birds, no pounding rice, only the breathing of water. The breathing quickened. Then, as if a heart were about to burst, a slender line of light appeared on the surface, gentle gold spreading in a soft arc, like a hand smoothing the water. Liana. Maya knew it instantly from the tenderness in that glow. Warm gold like sunlight sweeping through after a storm. Light yet commanding. The streak glided across the patch where the bubbles floated. The bubbles dissolved at once, released from whatever had been holding them. Space loosened. Wind shifted toward the woods, carrying fresh leaf scent and pushing the river's chill lower. Maya exhaled. She never saw Liana clearly, but that light was enough to know the black shadow had retreated for now. Not gone, only waiting. That waiting unsettled her more than open threat. The most patient hunters are the deadliest. She cradled Amira close, feeling the small, warm weight of her child. And, as always, the water answered with a gentle ripple, not strong, just enough to remind her the fight beneath the river was still watching every beat of her heart. The sky grayed again, preparing the backdrop for another night. Maya understood that to keep this child, she would have to be steadier than the bank itself and sharper than the current, because the river didn't simply want back what belonged to it. Down in the depths, something waited for the day she tired. For the single instant, her arms loosened to carry the baby home to that golden dark. But today she was still standing, and the river had not yet won. And now, my dear viewers, if you're watching and finding this story gripping, comment the number 1 or simply write, "I'm still here," so we can keep listening together. The next morning arrived in pale, washed-out light, as if the sky had stayed awake all night with the river. No murky gold lingered on the surface, but Maya knew this silence was only a thin shell. Something was coiling tighter beneath, waiting for the exact second to snap open like water cracking against stone. Amira had slept soundly through the night, yet when Maya woke, she noticed the baby's breathing had changed. Lighter, steadier, almost perfectly matched to the distant sound of the river. Each time the current shifted, the child's tiny chest rose in answer, as though she still lay cradled in water, and the water still held the right to set her heart's tempo. Maya laid a palm on the child's forehead. Warmth spread gently into her hand. Amira stayed peaceful, but a faint shimmer hovered beneath the closed lids like something touching from the other side. Not bold gold, only a thin sparkle sunk into the skin, the light of two worlds tugging at each other through that small body. Outside the porch there was no wind. The crows that usually quarreled on the roof had vanished, leaving a stillness so complete she could hear insects crawling inside tree bark. Maya wrapped the baby in a cotton cloth and stepped out. The ground felt colder than any ordinary morning cold left behind by something that had passed, leaving footprints no eye could see. She walked to the river bank. The morning water was so clear she could see the shallow bottom, yet the surface lay unnaturally flat, not one ripple. Everything below seemed to hold its breath, watching her approach. A single yellow leaf drifted down and touched the river. Instead of floating away, It spun in place and sank straight to the bottom, though the water was barely knee-deep. Maya froze. Water never swallows something that light without the smallest tremble. She stepped back. No golden flash, no bubbles, no scraping sound, but the absence was worse than any of them. The thing tracking her had stopped threatening or showing off power. It was simply waiting, and that waiting weighed more than the last 2 nights combined. Inside the village, human noise began to rise. Children shouted toward the fields, dogs barked at fences, knives chopped meat, voices drifted from neighbors' yards. Yet every sound felt painted on like a picture hung to hide whatever moved along the riverbed. Maya turned home, but the prickle at the back of her neck forced her to look once more. She saw nothing, yet she was certain something long was gliding sideways beneath the surface, hugging the bank with the stubbornness of a hunter that never quits. Back inside, she prepared breakfast with the same repeated motions. Each time her fingers closed around the wooden ladle, a thread of dread slid up her arm and soaked into her like rain into soil. The cook fire burned low, giving off dry smoke, but damp from the river still crept through every crack, carrying its clinging cold. In the middle of chores, Maya realized the baby was awake. Amira lay in the small cradle, eyes wide open, staring out the window toward the river as if seeing something Maya could not. No crying, no restless kicking, just round, knowing eyes far older than her days. Maya lifted her to her shoulder. The child's warmth spread across her neck, but moments later the skin cooled like a current moving softly inside the little body. Not the chill of wind, but the flowing depth of something immeasurable. She carried Amira outside. The sky had grayed further. Clouds gathered in heavy clumps, like birds too burdened to fly. The ground stayed soft, her footprints pressed deep and clear, as if the earth hadn't finished drinking last night's water. She walked slowly to the edge of the yard and stopped a safe distance from the reeds. From there, she could see the whole river. The water stayed flat, but its surface carried a faint tremor, like breathing. Just when she thought the stillness would hold, a hair-thin ripple swept across long, even, drawn by an invisible brush. No wind stirred the leaves around her. Right behind that ripple, a pale shadow appeared. Long as a great fish, yet fluid as cloth underwater. The shadow glided sideways and halted exactly opposite Maya. It did not rise. It did not shine. It simply waited, deliberate. Its silence cut sharper than any blade. Maya felt it slide across her throat. One heartbeat of perfect quiet passed. Then, far below, a pinprick of gold winked on like deep-sea light crushed beneath miles of water. Small as a fingertip, but enough. The lurking shadow had scented Amira. The spark blinked once and vanished. Maya crushed the baby closer. She felt the tiny body tense in her arms, as though the child understood that light had been meant for her. A sudden gust roared up from the river, slamming the porch roof until the boards rattled. Leaves tore loose, spun wildly, and fell like shredded paper. Beneath the surface, the long shadow slid back into deeper water, leaving 3 small whirlpools spinning in its wake. They turned neatly, then dissolved like the ghost of a promise. It would return. Next time, perhaps. Not just to warn. Maya shut the door and leaned her back against the wood. Her heart pounded like drums calling rain, echoing through her whole body. She knew the child in her arms was not only the target of whatever lived below. She was the hinge between 2 worlds slipping out of balance. The cold gold had caught Amira's scent, and when water comes to reclaim what it lost, it will not stop until the land tilts with it. The house sank into thick silence. No lapping water, no wind, only waiting. Another night was drawing close, and with it the golden shadow would return, no longer testing, but ready to measure its strength. Dusk fell like a massive door slowly closing, leaving the last streaks of light scattered across the ground like cold ashes after a cookfire. From afar, the willows along the riverbank swayed in slow rhythm, each long leaf a slender thread tying sky to water. Maya stood on the porch, arms wrapped around Amira, eyes tracing every tiny shift in the air, listening as if the earth itself were whispering secrets no human tongue could speak. There was no wind, yet dust rose from the path in small coils, twisted once, and dissolved. The ground beneath her feet had dried again, but it still felt as though a thin current ran just under the surface. Lately, the land had been like this, soft where it should be firm, cold where it should be warm, as if it no longer belonged entirely to itself. Inside, the oil lamp burned low, its pale gold flickering with every breath of air. Maya laid Amira in the cradle and let her own lingering warmth settle over the cloth. The baby did not cry or stir. She simply lay still, eyes half open, listening to some distant sound Maya could not hear. The glow in the child's eyes dimmed, then brightened whenever a far-off swell struck the bank, not hard, but enough to knock Maya's own heartbeat off rhythm. Night did not descend from the sky. It rose from the river's heart. The water turned darker than any previous night. A black cloth stretched tight across the surface. The reeds bent sideways, not from wind, but as if something were gently pulling each stalk down toward the earth. No roar, no violent tremor, just the slow movement of something stepping past the river's edge. Maya stood inside the doorway, afraid to cross the threshold again. The air had thickened like long fermented fish sauce, damp and cold woven together into a thin veil of mist. Each breath scraped her throat. Far below, a streak of cold gold flashed and vanished. No great motion followed, only a soft blink, like the eye of a colossal creature opening and closing beneath the mud. But what froze Maya's spine was that it blinked twice, slow, deliberate, rhythmic, a wordless whisper, "I see you." She shuddered, fingers tightening on the doorframe, anchoring herself against the gathering dark. Space began to shrink, as though the riverbank were inching closer to her porch. Suddenly, in the instant night and river became one. A small sound rose, not water, but flesh-brushing bark. Maya spun around. She saw only thick darkness curling around the willow trunks. No shape, only long shadows stretching across the ground, pulsing like someone else's heartbeat. Amira stirred in the cradle. Maya rushed over, scooped her up, and felt the tiny breaths warm against her neck. The baby's skin was warm, but the little hands were cool, as though they had just trailed through water. Maya looked down. The faint glow in the child's eyes flared brighter this time. Roused by the sound from the river's depths, she clutched Amira close and turned back to the door. Waves of cold crept across the porch, slicing through the lamp's beam until it swayed wildly. Darkness rose not from the roof or walls, but from the very seam where house met soil, as if tonight the land itself leaned toward the water, helpless against that silent pull. Maya felt the river drawing nearer, not by flowing, but by being. The ground beneath the house seemed to breathe in time with the child, long, then short, testing whether the baby heard, testing whether she would answer. She could not let the child hear. She could not let that invisible cord drag her away. Maya backed into the corner where the lamp's glow still held warmth against the dark. Even the flame faltered. It leapt once, then sank as if the darkness were drinking it. Maya cupped her hand around the last steady light, willing it to burn stronger. Out on the porch came the sound of water shifting. Not waves, not fish. The sound of a massive body gliding lightly, just enough to tremble the surface without breaking it. One long, low exhale, like breath held all day, finally released. The cold gold flashed again. This time longer, clearer, not a spot, a curve. The curve of a scaled creature, plates hard as stone, sliding across the riverbed like the shadow of a titan serpent on glass. No bubbles, no whirlpools. Its silence was more terrifying than any roar. It circled closer to the bank. Stopped. Circled again. Stopped. As if measuring the length of Maya's yard, searching for a deeper way in. Maya pressed Amira to her chest. Her arms shook, but her feet held. She knew one step back would be surrender. The cold gold rose almost to the surface. Maya saw the scales sharp, not radiant like Liana's, not soft as candlelight, but blades honed beneath the moon. The creature was one breath away from breaking through, one breath from showing its full shape. That breath stretched endlessly, long enough for a faint heart to mistake it for the silence before the storm. Then, from far downriver, a ribbon of warm gold swept in, smooth as silk lowered into water, gentle as a mother's palm on a fevered brow. "Liana," The queen needed no form. The land itself recognized her light. The two golds met again, one warm as dawn, one cold as silver steeped in ice. No clash of sound, yet the river shuddered. Reeds bowed flat as though swept by an unseen hand. The cold gold sank, sliding deep into the riverbed's darkness, like a beast that knows a better night will come. Liana drew her light back, soft, sorrowful, resolute. No words were needed. Maya understood. The queen could not shield Amira forever. The river has its laws. Water has its borders. Night exhaled slowly. A gentle wind returned. The scent of pounded corn drifted from a neighbor's yard. The lamp flames steadied. But Maya knew this was no ending, only a temporary retreat of the thing that wanted the child back. She looked down at Amira. The baby had fallen asleep again, long lashes trembling as if still hearing the far-off water. The child's warmth spread into Maya's body, a reminder that she was the last barrier between land and river. And tonight, though the water pulled, though the shadow followed, though the breath beneath the river thickened, Maya stood her ground unmoving on the battle line of a mother bound by no blood, yet armed with a heart stronger than the deepest current. That Louisiana morning unfolded in a washed-out indigo gray, thin as rice-washing water. The long night had not truly left. A veil of fine mist still clung to the ground like lingering smoke. The whole world seemed unwilling to greet the day. Even the birds called weakly, as if unsure whether the river would allow it. A soft breeze carried the smell of mud, the chill from the river's heart, and something nameless. Something that quietly reminded Maya the golden shadows still waited below, patient as stone. Inside the small house, Amira slept, breaths deep and even. Yet each time a gust slid past, the baby shifted faintly, as though hearing a voice from very far away. Maya stood beside the cradle, looking down at the tiny face, heart heavy. She brushed the child's hair, strands fine as new grass, and felt the almost imperceptible tremor beneath the skin. Not cold, but an answering pulse, invisible, from the river. She lifted Amira to the porch and stood in the thin mist that still beaded the yard. Sunlight struck the droplets on leaves like tiny needles, but the sparkle held no morning joy. Everything felt blurred, as though night had not been fully chased away. The ground at her feet was strangely cold, as if the earth itself were listening. She sensed a faint vibration from the riverbank, not the slap of water, but a tremor in the soil beneath her soles. As though the river were holding its breath, preparing to speak without sound. Maya drew Amira closer, heart pounding hard, yet her steps stayed deliberate. She moved slowly toward the grass beside the house, far enough to see the river clearly yet keep a safe distance. The morning water lay impossibly flat enough that not even a minnow's passing disturbed it. That flatness was not natural. It felt forced, as if an unseen hand held the river still, refusing its own instincts. The air around it hung thick as smoke, pressing against the skin. Maya stopped at the edge of the yard, eyes fixed on the surface. For the first breaths, nothing. Then, very slowly, very deep, a band of darkness slid across the bottom like ink bleeding beneath thin silk. No gold, no bubbles, only shadow. But that shadow pressed the ground beneath her feet downward, just slightly, as though its sheer weight bent the earth itself. Maya held her breath. The shadow glided left to right, slow, deliberate. Not the motion of fish, not the instinct of any ordinary creature. This was the movement of a watcher weighing, measuring, searching for cracks in the land to slip through. Amira stirred, her eyes opened a slit. No cry, no call. She simply looked toward the water, as if she had always known it was there. Maya turned half a step, shielding the child's gaze from the river. A sudden hard gust swept the yard, hurling dead leaves across the grass. It tore over the water, yet the surface did not move. Wind and river belonged to two different worlds in that moment. The sight sent ice down Maya's spine, the river refusing to yield to wind, saving its strength for something larger. Then, from the middle of the channel, 3 small whirlpools rose, perfect, even, unhurried. Maya knew chance had nothing to do with it. 3 circles, a mark, a signal. She backed away, Each step sure, each breath controlled. The center whirlpool widened, then dissolved without a sound, leaving the river still again. In that exact instant, a hair-thin flash of gold cut across the surface, neither the cold gold of the nights before nor Liana's warmth. It was neutral, sharp, metallic in the early light. Another signal. Not threat, but warning. The boundary was thinning, ready to tear. The ground beneath Maya's feet shuddered once, not violently, but unmistakably. A sigh from the earth's veins as they were squeezed by the pull rising from below. She felt the land itself trying to hold the child back from the drag beneath. But the effort felt fragile, temporary. She cradled Amira and walked inside. Every footfall landed on living soil that twitched faintly from the river's pulse. Once through the door, she shut it, back against the wood, baby pressed tight. Outside, wind rose again, stronger now, whipping dust into pale ribbons. It moaned around the eaves like the low complaint of cypress trees. Maya went to the window and opened a narrow crack. From here, the river looked farther away, yet its stillness was sharper. No motion, no light, no swirl, but the stillness offered no peace. It was the stillness of something standing just outside the door, waiting for the householder to blink. The stillness of a hunter who has matched its breath to a single strike. Amira squirmed in Maya's arms. Tiny hands touched her mother's neck, then closed as if grasping an invisible thread. Maya looked down. The glow beneath the child's skin had vanished entirely, replaced by fragile calm. But Maya knew the calm was only a mask, because far along the bank, in the compressed air, Maya felt, not with ears, but with bone, a faint vibration. Not loud, not clear, but the tremor of something climbing closer to the line between land and water, something that did not belong to earth yet refused to stay beneath the river forever. She held Amira against her heart. The house fell, tomb silent. The river waited like a final breath before waking. And the golden shadow at the bottom, it had not left. It was only waiting for the moment to cross into her world. Maya understood the next part of the fight would no longer stay underwater. It was coming closer. Very close. And when it did, she would have to stand in the middle no matter if the land tilted and the water pulled. Afternoon slid in like a long shadow, making land and water feel as if they were quietly trading places. The thick honey gold sunlight Louisiana usually wears had been smothered beneath heavy gray clouds. Whenever the sun tried to push through, it managed only a frail halo enough to make the rooftops shimmer, but not enough to warm the air. Maya stood at the door, Amira against her chest, feeling the river's slow labor pressing against the veins of the earth. Across the water, thin mist began to spread in uneven patches. In some places it bunched like wet gauze. In others it stretched into long ribbons, as though an invisible hand were pulling it toward the deeper channel. From where Maya stood, the river looked like a sheet of cloth being drawn tight, tested, inch by inch, for the moment it would tear. Everything signaled waiting. All morning the river had stayed motionless. The darkness beneath had not risen. But Maya knew that stillness was not peace. It was the crouch of a predator in high grass, waiting for the smallest twitch of its prey. What waited was not Maya, it was Amira. One offbeat breath from the child could make the water quake. She laid Amira in the little cradle and stepped into the yard, eyes on the ground. Thin cracks, delicate, curved like claw marks, ran from the porch footings to the edge of the grass. Not cracks from drought. She knelt, touched one. The rim was warm, the heart was cold. That difference felt like river breath sneaking along underground channels into her yard. She rose and looked toward the bank, not far away. The reeds bowed slightly, as if listening to a silent warning. Every few seconds they shivered hard, as though someone below were pumping water upward into the empty air. Inside, Amira gave a soft exhale. Not a cry, more a shiver at a soundless call. Maya hurried back, lifted the baby. The moment skin touched skin, she felt the strange blend. Warmth from the chest, coolness from the palms, two opposing forces tugging, neither yielding. The child's eyes opened a slit. The light in them was dim but reflected the waiting water far below. Maya held her close and walked slowly to the door. Outside, darkness had already begun pooling, though true dusk had not fallen. The white willows stood carved from wood, leaves motionless, branches still. Wind had vanished completely. Only the river remained, flat as a mirror, yet its mist curled like cookfire smoke. The stillness stretched Maya's skin tight, waiting for thunder that never came. On the river's face, a single, small ring began to spread from an invisible center. Each circle widened perfectly, yet did not fade as ordinary ripples do. They held their shape for seconds before thinning. As one dissolved, another appeared slow, patient breathing of something huge rising closer. Maya stepped back onto the porch but kept her eyes on the water. The far bank blurred in mist. Only the faint outlines of riverside houses remained. The air felt like black cloth pulled drum-tight, waiting for the first stitch to snap. Then it came. A blade of cold gold sliced the surface, not blinding like previous nights, but thin, sharp, straight as a cut in metal. It was long, bending slightly with the body moving beneath. It did not surge upward or throw spray. It simply parted the water for one heartbeat into two glassy sheets. Maya's breath stopped. The gold vanished instantly. But three tiny lights rose in its place, not round like bubbles, not twinkling like stars. 3 points in a perfect line, surfacing and sinking in rhythm, like footsteps measuring direction underwater. Amira curled tighter in Maya's arms, tiny fingers clutching her mother's shirt. Maya looked down. The child's eyes were wide open, though she made no sound, and the reflection in them was the river's cold gold, not Liana's. Suddenly, the surface split along 2 parallel seams, not from the gold blade, but from a long, massive body pushing upward. Reeds on the bank bent hard, then whipped back as though struck by an unseen wing. Maya stood motionless, a marker post between earth and wind. She felt the movement directly beneath the river, huge, slow, deliberate. It was entering shallower water than ever before. One more heartbeat, and it would touch land. A blast of cold swept from the river straight into Maya. Her arms trembled around Amira, but her feet did not retreat. She knew one step backward would be the gap the water needed to pour through. Then, suddenly, a ribbon of warm gold bloomed across the surface, gentle, soft, spreading into a wide arc. The mist over the water flushed pink and peeled away from the reeds. Liana. No shape was needed. Maya felt the queen's presence. The warm light touched the cold ripples. They met without sound, only a shifting of water. A small wave slapped the bank like a stifled cough. The silent tug of war lasted soundlessly. Water drew in, water stretched out. Reeds swayed, wind rose from the cypress. Everything gathered into one pulse. Then the cold gold vanished. Liana never surfaced. Only her lingering warmth remained, spreading, holding the mist at bay. Maya carried Amira inside. Night had fully arrived, yet the river had not withdrawn its breath. She closed the door and leaned her ear against the wood, listening to the deep, patient breathing of the monster that had not yet given up. That night came so fast it felt like someone had yanked the sun straight out of the sky. When darkness fell, the world didn't slip into its usual quiet. Instead, it sank, heavy as thick water poured over the roof. Everything drowned in dense cold, and the smell of river mud crawled across the ground without needing any wind. Maya stood at the small window, cradling Amira tight against her chest. The baby's breath was steady, but colder than it should have been, as if her skin were drinking the chill straight from the deep night outside. Maya peered through the narrow gap in the wooden shutter, where the reed bed still caught a faint smear of light from the thin moon. Not a single stalk moved. The absolute stillness made the whole scene look like a painting hanging there, waiting for someone to reach out and touch it. But Maya knew that beneath that stillness, something was moving without pause, something that had been watching their house for nights on end. Inside, the fire in the hearth burned low, its glow only enough to throw long shadows on the walls. Maya laid Amira down on the little mattress in the corner and tucked a cloth over her. The child didn't cry or stir. Her eyes fluttered open, then closed again, as though she'd heard something passing along the river's edge. Maya turned back to the window. The air out there wasn't just cold, it felt weighted, like it was waiting. A small sound came from the bank. Not the slap of water, but a faint hiss, like river stones scraping against something harder. Maya held her breath. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if something were sliding just under the thin layer of soil. The hiss stretched on for a moment, then cut off abruptly, choked silent. Maya stepped back, but kept her eyes locked on the edge of the window. For an instant, the shadow of something huge glided across the water's surface. No clear shape, just darkness thicker than the rest, bending slowly. The streak was long and utterly quiet, as though it never touched the water at all, only skimmed across the mist. The reed bed shuddered once, one single, sharp jerk. The stalks didn't lean with the wind or the current. They bent straight toward Maya's house, as if a hot breath had just rolled up from underground and pushed them from behind. Maya clutched Amira closer. In that moment, she clearly felt the baby's tiny chest rising and falling faster. Her breaths came shallow, like invisible threads were tugging each one out of that little body. Maya pressed her hand to Amira's chest and felt a faint vibration inside, not a racing heart, but something more like the soft lap of water. In a flash, a streak of cold, golden light cut across the river. It wasn't bright, but it was sharp, like a thin blade drawn across the surface. The water parted, then closed again instantly. Maya pulled the baby tighter against her. Her own heart pounded so hard her ears rang. That golden light wasn't Liana's, it lacked the soft warmth. It was sharp, cold, and straight, like an intention that had never bothered to hide. Very slowly, a huge curve moved beneath the water. No shape to see, but Maya caught the reflection of massive scales catching that cold gold glow. Those scales weren't soft like Liana's. They looked like hard stone etched with ancient marks. They slid along the riverbed, each one flaring once, then dimming like a sigh forced back down. The air inside the house grew heavier. Maya felt the damp pressing through every crack, slipping in like cold fingers. She breathed deep, trying to stay calm, and laid her hand on Amira's forehead to hold the warmth there. But the baby's skin was no longer warm like it had been that afternoon. It felt like dew condensed on leaves. Out on the porch, a slow sound began. One beat, another, not human footsteps, not any animal, Maya knew. It was the muted drag of a long body hauling itself closer to the bank, pressing into the earth like someone feeling their way through darkness. The reeds nearest the shore bent flat all at once, forming a clear path where something huge had just passed. Maya gripped the edge of the bed to steady herself. She felt the wooden floor tremble once, as though the ground beneath the house had been touched by something heavy out front. She didn't dare go to the door, but her ears caught every vibration. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't aggressive. It was careful, patient, and very familiar with the cold light it carried. Suddenly, the baby opened her eyes. A faint glow rose beneath her skin, not bright, just a brief shimmer like moonlight spilling across water. That alone was enough to change the rhythm of the river outside. A heavy wave slammed straight into the reed bank, not violent, but weighted, like a warning. Mist on the surface swirled into a thin circle, then split apart. Maya leaned forward, shielding the window with her own body, as if she could wall off two worlds. Damp air rushed through the cracks, carrying the smell of cold and metal, like the night itself breathing. The reeds shook again, harder. Then from the darkness, from the depths, from somewhere no one could see, a cold, golden flash arced beneath the water, carving a curve as though it meant to rise onto the bank. Maya held Amira so tight the baby trembled faintly in her arms, reacting to that wordless sound. Her eyes opened again, staring toward the river even though she couldn't see it. Maya turned the child inward against her chest, blocking that gaze from reaching the water. Then, unexpectedly, far out on the surface, a second golden light spread soft, light, gentle as warmth after a storm. Liana. Maya didn't need to see her to feel the tenderness in that glow. The warm light wrapped around the cold one, forcing it back, inch by inch. The two streams of gold met like opposing currents, no roar, no towering waves, only the silent pressure of power. The water parted, then settled. The reeds straightened slowly. The cold gold vanished first. Liana's followed, fading like bright ash carried away by the flow. Maya stood frozen for a long time, breathing ragged from the strain. The ground beneath her feet felt solid again. The mist thinned. The night filled once more with insect sounds, as though it had given up its plan to drag her house down into the water. But Maya knew this wasn't the last time. That cold golden streak had reached the very edge of the bank, and in just one more night, it might cross the land. Tomorrow, something would change. The final night arrived without warning. No wind to push the mist, no birds calling to one another before dusk. Only darkness falling like a thick silk curtain, swallowing the ground so completely that even the blades of grass seemed devoured by it. Maya stood on the porch, Amira cradled in her arms, the baby's breath fragile as a thread stretched between two fates. The river in front of them was no longer a peaceful ribbon. It looked blacker than any night before, as though the moonlight had been sucked straight to the bottom. Layers of mist rose, not scattering but twisting, forming thin ribbons like smoke trails. The water lay perfectly still, yet that stillness felt like glass on the verge of shattering. The reed beds stood in clumps, their soft stalks pulled taut by an invisible pressure. Maya stepped down from the porch, bare feet touching the cool earth, feeling the faint tremor beneath the soil. She knew this was not a night for running. This was the night the river and the land would decide where her child truly belonged. She pulled Amira closer, her own heartbeat merging with the baby's. In that absolute silence, she could hear the water gathering force, preparing for one last surge. The surface suddenly lit up with a streak of cold gold, long and sharp as a blade slicing through black cloth. The light didn't fade right away. It held, widening bit by bit, like the eye of some enormous creature slowly opening after nights of watching. The reeds bent hard toward it, as though pulled by the river's breath. The ground beneath Maya's feet cracked faintly into thin lines, delicate as needle scratches. No sound, but she felt the pressure from the riverbed spilling onto the land like two worlds shoving against each other to claim the child in her trembling yet determined arms. Then the long shadow appeared beneath the water, bigger than any time before. It curved along the bottom, a rigid, endless body flashing broken streaks of cold gold. This was no longer stalking. This was a deliberate rise. Each section moved slowly, but its weight pressed the surface down like fabric crushed under something immense. The golden light beneath flared not from one point but from hundreds scattered along its length, spreading like dying stars. The water split wide into two great seams, and in that instant, Maya felt the earth itself and her own body being dragged toward the bank. She leaned forward, clutching Amira, digging her heels into the soil as if anchoring an entire world on the brink. Suddenly, Amira opened her eyes. This time, no harsh glow burst beneath her skin, only a soft pink light spreading gently along her lashes. It wasn't brilliant, but it was enough to warm the space in Maya's arms. The baby didn't cry. She simply looked toward the water with a strange gaze, the gaze of someone recognizing something adults could never understand. At that exact moment, from deep within the river, a second light rose soft, warm, spreading like golden thread across the surface. This light didn't tear the water. It lifted it, the way a mother lifts her child's face. It wrapped around the thin mist, melting it away like the last breath of a weary night. Liana. She didn't need to appear, didn't need words. Maya knew she was there. The warm glow grew, expanding into a great circle that cradled the river with a tenderness only a mother possesses. The two golden streams, one cold, one warm, met right in the heart of the river. No explosion, no towering waves, only a silent struggle that set the entire reed bed shaking. The stalks whipped back and forth, water surged against the bank, cold mist slapped Maya's cheeks and made her shiver. But she stood firm, her feet rooted like ancient trees. The cold gold pushed harder, trying to break straight onto the shore and drag the child back with it. The surface was slashed into streaks, sharp light cutting along the curve of the long shadow below. Yet every cold slash was forced down by Liana's warm gold, extinguished like ash meeting water. Wind rose without warning, strong enough to rattle the porch boards. Mist twisted into spirals, lifting dirt in a great swirling ring. Maya pulled Amira tight against her chest, bending slightly to shield her from the gust, but her eyes never left the river. This wasn't her fight, yet her very existence was the anchor for this child. The long shadow beneath the water thrashed violently, The surface shattered into shards of light that fell back like broken metal. Reeds were torn sideways, curling as though slapped from below. The thick smell of cold mud rose, filling the space between bank and river. Then, from even deeper, Liana's warm light suddenly spread into a vast circle that surrounded the shadow, pushing it back beat by beat. Warm gold filled every cold gap, pouring down to the bottom like a stream through stone crevices. The strength wasn't fierce. It was relentless, like a lullaby sung through the night, slowly weakening the one still struggling against it. At last, the long shadow sank completely. The cold gold faded, thinning like ash swept away by the current. The river's surface cooled, returning to a tired but safe stillness. The mist peeled away in layers, leaving the battered yet standing reeds behind. Liana never surfaced. Only one final streak of warm light drifted across the water like a gentle touch to the child's cheek. Amira sighed in Maya's arms, soft and deep, as if recognizing a familiar warmth. Maya stepped back onto the porch, her soles touching earth that felt reborn after unimaginable strain. She held Amira close to her heart, feeling the baby's breath return to its steady rhythm, no longer cold. Out there, the river breathed slow and long, like someone who had just survived the final wrestle of the night. When the door closed, one last gentle breeze slipped in from the river. Not cold, not heavy, only the warm whisper of a mother's goodnight to a child caught between two worlds. That night held no other sound, but in the silence, Maya knew. The river's boundary had retreated, and the land had accepted. Tomorrow would be a different day. That night drew to a close like a long, weary sigh, carrying away both fear and relief. Maya held Amira close, feeling the steady arms of the land shielding them, while out there the river still glimmered with one last ring of light, like a promise that a mother's love never abandons her child. What happened at the boundary between land and water wasn't just a tug of war between two worlds. It was a reminder that love has the power to soften even the coldest blade, to push back even the shadows that once lurked in silence. But you know, that river hasn't truly gone to sleep. It's only holding its breath, waiting for tomorrow, because every time Liana's warm light touches the surface, it leaves a big question behind. Has the golden shadow really retreated, or is it simply waiting for another chance to return? And when Amira grows up, when the light inside her burns brighter, will the water rise again? That's the journey waiting in the next part. That's where the story opens a brand new door. If you've followed this far, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Folktales, the legends of the African American community, are always most beautiful when we tell them together, when we share them in families, in communities, on slow, misty evenings, just like this one. And if something in this story touched you, Maya's resilience, Liana's warmth, or the quiet fight of mothers everywhere, please hit subscribe so we can meet again on the next part of the journey. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family all across the United States, so the story can spread as far as the river itself keeps flowing.